You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to the show. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. This week, we're going to temporarily rename it to Mighty Blue on the West Highland Way, Two Old Fools on Tour. I'm Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams, and the other old fool is my buddy of 60 years, my mate John Robertson, who gamely came along with me on this little hike. You'll hear how that happened, as well as what happened on our recent West Highland Way saunter, because that's what it turned out to be. It's not the normal format today, much like last week in fact, but I hope you'll enjoy listening to what happened over 9 wonderful days at the beginning of April this year. As with all hikes, we allowed it to unfold around us and we had a hugely enjoyable time together on this magical trail. There'll be no class of 2022 catch-ups this week. They're going to resume next week, and I won't be starting the new book. That'll also happen next week. So sit back, grab a coffee, and hear our story. Day 1, from Milngavie, which is mile 0, to Drymen Camping, mile 11.0, an 11-mile day. So, the West Highland Way, day 1. And I think I'll step back a little bit to tell you how I invited my buddy John. The original plan was to do the West Highland Way in, I think, 6 days, and then do Hadrian's Warpath in 5 days. And I've been travelling around the UK with my girlfriend, Dana, and she was returning to the US after our 3-week tour of the UK. And we had a blast, by the way. It was absolutely amazing. And we were going around my old town right at the very beginning of our trip, where she wanted to see where I was born and where I used to live and so on. And I happened to remember an old friend of mine who I'd known since I was about 9 or 10, John Robertson, his name is. I knew that he lived just around the corner from one of the houses I used to live at. So I said, well, let's go and knock on the door, see if he's there. Now, I normally don't do that, but I think because Americans don't tend to do that. But anyway, we went around there, knocked on the door, and he and his wife, Sue, were delighted to see us. So we're sitting down having a cup of coffee. And he said, well, what are you doing? I said, we're going to tour around the UK and then I'm going to go hiking in Scotland. It's one of those kind of throwaway remarks. I said, why don't you come with me? He said, I think I will. That is so unlike John, let me tell you. But he decided to come with me. And he started putting together a plan. He didn't want to do it the way I wanted to do it because he said, I don't think I can do this in 6 days. He said, I don't really want to carry any gear because he'd never hiked before. So I said, look, whatever you want to do, we'll do it your way. I still want to camp because I've got all my gear anyway. And so he organised a company to do it at a 9-day itinerary, which was fine by me. And we decided that we were going to saunter the West Highland Way. And John Muir himself would have been very proud of us for sauntering. And that's kind of what we did. And he put together a bunch of gear and so on. And eventually he was staying in touch while I was still travelling around the UK. And the idea was we'd meet up in Luton Airport, where I was going to be flying to Scotland on Saturday, April the 2nd. And we met there. He got a flight. We got the flight together up to Glasgow. And we got there in the evening and he had 20-year-old leather boots. He had his, I don't know, golfing jacket, I think, something like that. He had all sorts of made-up stuff, but none of it seemed to bother him. He was quite relaxed about it all because he wasn't carrying much of a pack, which was great. We got into Glasgow, got a cab into, now they call it I think they call it Milngavie. It's spelled Milngavi, which in my parlance, that's got to be Milngavie, but apparently it's Milngavie. And John and I got there. We'd both been booked into actually 2 separate Premier Inns. And so we went to our own respective places and we met up in a pub for beers and food and then just went our separate ways. I was pretty tired by then, ready for bed, and got up the next day, which was the day we were going to start the trail, which was Sunday the 3rd of April. I had breakfast at 8 a.m. in my place, and I had kind of uneasy feeling that first day. I think I tend to when I go hiking. I'm not sure what it's going to be like, and the forecast was pretty crappy for the week. But that day was pretty darn good. It wasn't raining at all, and we had a nice blue sky. I went down to meet John. He was nearer to the start in Milngavie. We then walked to the start, and I needed gas for cooking because I was intending to camp every night. Didn't turn out that way, but that's what I needed it for. And I thought I was bound to be able to get it on the way. Of course, it's Sunday morning. Tesco's was open, which is one of their local shops, and Spar stores were open, but none of them had gas. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, so I had to actually start without gas. Now, John's first day was going to be 12 miles, which is quite a long first day, actually. He was going to stay at a place called Drummond, Drymen, or Drymen, but Drummond is apparently how it's pronounced. And I was going to stay at a place called Drymen Camping, about 1 mile short of the town of Drummond. So we get ready for our pictures, still got no gas, which is a bit of a drag. And we started, looking at my photos, it says we started at 9:27 a.m. And right near the start, right in the middle of the town there is this Scottish National Water fountain, which hikers can fill up with, which is very generous, I thought. So we had our pictures taken, we set off, nice flat walk, past a river, through a park. And after about 10 minutes, I reached back for my water and it wasn't there. But I knew exactly where it was. It was going to be on the top of that Scottish National Water fountain, wasn't it? I didn't worry about losing it. I never thought for a minute it wasn't going to be there. I went back and I found it there. So having started at 9:27 a.m., I started once more at 9:51 a.m. Got back to John. He'd been stretching and moving around and that. We were still really in the town or in the park. And the initial climb out was very gentle. We eventually got into countryside with lots of sheep around, and sheep, one of the big features of the hike actually, and past lakes and so on. I was kind of surprised at the wilderness of the place. I played golf in Scotland before, but I'd never seen it like this at all, and I hadn't really driven through Scotland much. Dana and I had gone to Stranraer and stayed at a lighthouse and then came straight back down to England, so we didn't really go through Scotland. And as a Brit, I'd never really gone and toured Scotland other than to play golf. Well, partway through, we came to this little supplies place. It was just a general store sort of shop. And I thought I'd ask if they had any gas there. And the young man there said, I think we have got some. I think we had some last year. Let me search. Oh, my God. Did he search? He pulled out boxes of this, boxes of that. I think they're here. And eventually he found 2 of them. I was so overwhelmed. I was so grateful for the effort he'd made. I bought 2 just in case. I never actually needed the second one as it turned out. But it was lovely to really get that. We carried on the hike. We eventually came to a place, I think it's called Kinlochleven, and a pub called the Beech Tree Inn. And of course, being hikers, we went inside. Most people apparently were eating outside or somewhere nearby, but we decided to go inside and it was nearly empty. We had a beautiful chicken soup and then a completely unneeded baked potato with tuna and mayo. But of course, being hikers, we carried on eating. There was nothing difficult about the day, apart from the fact it was 12 miles on the first day. The climbs were pretty gentle and we just had a good time. And one thing I noticed with John and I, we just talked endlessly. We'd never had a moment where we felt in need to talk. We were just talking and just chatting about the amount of time in each other's life that we'd missed. So he didn't know about a lot of my life. I didn't know about a lot of his life either. And so it was lovely for me to catch up with John in that way. As I say, I'd planned to stop a mile short of Drummond, and as luckily, as luck would have it, as we closed in on Drymen Camping, turns out that it was about to rain. So it did rain for a little bit on John as he went into Drummond itself. I mean, his organisation, the company that organised his trip, had got him a place somewhere in Drummond, and they got him bed and breakfasts and pubs and hotels along the way. And they made some pretty darn good choices. They really did. I got into the camping place, and for 10 quid, there's showers, there's a big barn, and there's chargers in there, there's picnic tables in there. So if it was that wet, you could just sleep inside. I guess you could sleep inside the barn. It wouldn't be that bad. And there were other people there. I set my tent up pretty quickly, which I was really pleased about. I met an ex-military guy called Gavin and his wife Helen and their son Charlie and their daughter Ruby and Shelby. A Great Dane. Can you imagine taking a Great Dane on a trip any backpacking trip, to be honest with you? And he carried a lot of food. And Gavin, as I say, is ex-military and he's great for solving the problem. And his enthusiasm for this hike, he actually saw my Appalachian Trail red tag on the side from my 2019 hike. And he started talking about the Appalachian Trail to me. And we just struck up a conversation. And the family was struggling. They'd only done 2.5 miles that day. They were carrying way too much. They carried a huge amount of food for the dog, and they were talking about putting the dog in kennels. But as it turned out, they didn't actually do that, but we'll come back to them later. But they were terrific people, and their enthusiasm for the whole thing was great. The kids were finding it tough, but their enthusiasm never diminished. And I think it's partly because of the driving force of Gavin being so positive about it all. The next morning, I got my gas out, having slept the night, by the way, pretty well. I didn't do too bad in my tent at all. Didn't get wet. It was great. Rained a little bit in the night, but not too bad. And I had coffee with Gavin and Helen, because they didn't have any coffee with them, so I gave them some coffee. That was lovely. We were just sitting around talking on the picnic tables. I met a young lady called Margaret who sets up and takes down the tents. She had a party of 4 of them, I think it was, doing a 6-day walk, and she sets up the tents. She then she takes down the tents, makes some food, makes her group food, and then drives to wherever they're going to be camping that night, sets the tents up. So when they arrive, their tents are already ready for them, which is pretty cool. And at the end of the trip, she drives them back to Glasgow at the end. So, I've not done this for a while. It's like 3 days in the Sierras last year. Of course, after my AT hike, I hadn't really done it and slept out much, and it was a lovely introduction to it. And I knew straight away I was really going to enjoy this trip. So that's day 1. Day 2, from Drymen Camping, mile 11.0, to Balmaha, mile 19.2, an 8.2 mile day. Day 2. Having woken up and chatted with everybody and, as always, taking my time to get out of camp, I'd arranged, I think, to meet John, because he was never really an early starter. He didn't want to get up too early. And I was up by 5 o'clock, I think it was, 5:30, having coffee by myself till everybody started waking up. But John wasn't really keen on getting up much before 8 and having breakfast at 8:30 and leaving around 9, which is fine by me. I had to catch up with him first, of course, so I had about a mile to get into Drummond. There's a lovely little path through a meadow. It was pretty boggy at the bottom, but there's something about walking through a meadow and just a little path through a meadow that's always attracted me as a person anyway. And certainly I discovered that more when I was actually on the Appalachian Trail, and I really, really loved the feeling of just going through meadows. I got into Drummond, and actually the trail kind of skirts the town and heads off right, but to get into Drummond itself to meet John, I had to turn left and go down towards where John was. I can't stand going down because it means if I'm going to turn around when I met him, I'll be going back up again. But, that's the way it goes, I suppose. And in fact, when I got down about half a mile, I knew there was still a bit of a climb up to get to John's place, the place he was staying rather, another bed and breakfast. And I texted him to come towards me. So I didn't want to do these unnecessary miles, a trick I learned obviously on the Appalachian Trail, where if it was more than 200 yards off trail, I would hardly ever go take a blue blaze down to see something else that was going to be off trail. And if you're walking 2,200 miles, you don't need any extra miles. As far as I'm concerned, I don't anyway. Now, this was probably the biggest disaster of the entire trip. So bear with me on this one because it still hurts when I think about it. We walked a mile and we came to a kind of T-junction. And it said Drummond to the left, and something else to the right. There was no sign for West Highland Way at all. Well, we obviously didn't want to go back to Drummond, and for some reason, I didn't check, because I could see at a sort of caddy corner over about 50 yards on the other side of the road, there was another road leading somewhere else. And there were signs there, but I didn't check them out because I thought John had been told he could go up the hill from where he was instead of coming down the hill to meet me, and he would then re-meet the West Highland Way. We presumed this is where he'd re-meet the West Highland Way. And so he didn't say anything, I didn't say anything, we just simply turned right. And I knew that there was a bit of a climb up on looking at Far Out app. The app I use used to be called Gut Hooks, it's now Far Out. It's pretty good coverage of the West Highland Way as well. And it shows you the moment you get off trail. All I had to do was walk 20 yards and I would have known I was going the wrong way. But I didn't. We were talking as we did the whole way. And the idea was, as we saw it, as we saw the elevation in Far Out, we'd go up a bit and then be on the flat. Well, we were chatting away, we went up and we started going down. And I didn't think about it, but we kept going down and down and down. And that we were taking videos. And now I look back on those videos, it's embarrassing, really. Taking videos and talking about how quiet it was. Well, I know why it was quiet. We were going the wrong way, absolutely going totally the wrong way. There were hardly any cars. There were, as John said, there were some surprised-looking cows. They were obviously surprised because they didn't see any hikers come this way. So I suddenly said to him, I was sure this was meant to be flat. And I checked the Far Out app. I'd come so far off the trail that I was actually off the map on Far Out. All I could see was my blue dot. The map wasn't there anymore. And we were 2.4 miles out of our way. And when we looked round, because we'd come down all this way, it was 2.4 miles uphill back. Oh my gosh. I wouldn't say it was my ego necessarily, but I was embarrassed. I'm supposed to be the one who knows what I'm doing, but I've been pretty hopeless at stuff generally on this trip so far. I didn't have any gas and I'd lost a few things already. So we just started trudging uphill. And as I say, there were hardly any cars on the road, but suddenly a car came along and there was a couple of older people in the car, even older than us. And they reluctantly sort of stopped and they opened their window slowly and they were, I said, any chance you can give us a lift up here? We've gone totally out of our way. And she said, well, I've just got over COVID. And we said, absolutely no problem at all. Of course, we entirely understand. So they drove off. Well, 5 minutes later, they drove back. The guy said, you know what, guys, if you will put on a mask and sit in the back and have the windows open, then, we'll take you. He said, I couldn't have slept tonight, knowing how much of a climb you still had to do to get back up there. Yeah, and really, they were lifesavers. I was so deflated, though. I mean, I thanked them, and I was so grateful for what they'd done. And really, we didn't have that far to go that day. But I lost the impetus of the hike straight away. I was kind of disappointed and surprised at myself for losing my enthusiasm. One thing about me, I'm normally enthusiastic about things most of the time. But it was my responsibility, and I'd led us so far wrong. But anyway, that Caddy Corner road was the one we should have taken. And it said West Highland Way on it. So I should have gone and checked. Anyway, we then set off. And we knew that Conic Hill was supposed to be the big climb of the day. It's not huge. It goes up about 500 feet, 600 feet, something like that, in quite a short period. But for those of you who know the Appalachian Trail, for example, it looks like a mini hump mountain. In fact, it was strikingly like that to look at. And of course, we start going down and down and down, knowing that the only reason to go down means you're going to climb up again soon. And we did. Got to the bottom of the hill, crossed a bridge over a stream and started climbing up. It was windy. It was quite cool, which is nice to hike in. A few spots of rain, but nothing too bad. And we stopped, I had to stop every 30 or so yards to gasp and get my breath. It was like whenever I'd climbed on the AT, certainly for the first, 300 or 400 miles, I was gasping for breath, trying to catch my breath, But the higher we got, the more beautiful it became, because views of Loch Lomond were starting to unfold, and they just opened up more and more and more. As with all mountains, there were plenty of false summits. This one doesn't actually go over the summit of Conic Hill, but we thought we were at the top, and suddenly we went around a corner and we had to go a little bit further up. On the way down, it got rockier and rockier, and my feet were sliding forward and my toes were getting bruised and banged at the end. But my biggest problem, without going into too many technical details, was chafing. Oh my gosh. I could hardly sit down at the end of it. Let's leave it at that. I'd already decided that I was enjoying my time with John so much that I booked the same place as John in Balmaha. This was opposite the Oak Tree Inn in Balmaha. And I had a room for 3 people all to myself for about 60 quid, which was lovely. A real treat, it really was. We went into the Oak Tree Inn, and frankly, I'm not sure it was because of the, my guilt at having gone wrong, but I was really down. I looked terrible. John told me I looked terrible, by the way. Here's a bloke who'd never hiked at all. And he said, "Oh my God, Steve, you look awful." But we had a soup and we had a steak pie, and both of which were lovely, by the way. So I'd highly recommend the Oak Tree Inn to eat at in Balmaha. But I'd struggled all day. And frankly, it was my fault. Get over it. Move on. That's the end of day 2. Day 3. From Balmaha, mile 19.2, to Rowardennan, mile 27.6. Just an 8.4 mile day. Day 3. One tragic to me thing that I forgot to mention yesterday was that after carrying it throughout, probably the last 20 years on my head at various soccer matches in the UK, and my 2014 AT through hike and my 2019 AT through hike, and on my abortive attempts on the John Muir Trail, and I think on the Camino de Santiago, I lost my Mighty Blues beanie. Now, all right, it's only a beanie. You can get another one. But man, that has ticked me off more than I can tell you. It was in my back pocket. I must have, put my pack on. It probably rubbed up against it and just knocked it out. But I lost my beanie and I'm gutted. I really am gutted. Anyway, got up pretty late this time. We had breakfast together. I went and joined him and had breakfast with him in a summer house, which was lovely, where he was staying. And we had smoked salmon and eggs and all that sort of thing, which was great. We had a small climb. Actually, before we started, the forecast was pretty bad. We were expecting rain most of the day. And it had started to rain a little bit. It was only spotty rain for most of the day, actually, so it wasn't too bad. And we had a small climb after an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours, that gave us this amazing 360-degree view of Loch Lomond. Not obviously all the way around, because that would have made us on an island. But it's just such a vast lake that you can pretty much see it in all directions. And it was beautiful. And it was really then that it did start to rain a little bit more. Something that I started to notice, although he'd already started it a few times, John really liked the idea of silence. I suppose, in our world, we're surrounded by noise all the time. And when you get that chance to have complete silence, John said, "Let's just stop." We'd stop for 20 seconds. And 20 seconds, when you've been hiking and just stopping and listening, is a surprisingly, therapeutic period of time. And we really enjoyed those silences. I mean, I know it seems bizarre, but we did. So we were alongside Loch Lomond by now, and we were walking along the beach. It's you could hear our feet on the sand, and we took pictures with the rain in the background and so on. And we kept noticing that there actually was sunshine, but it was on the opposite bank often, and never on us. All day long, we didn't get any sunshine. We got back into the trees, and there were beautiful greens in all the mosses there. I've never seen so much moss. I saw quite a bit on the Appalachian Trail in certain places, but the mosses and the greens that I saw in Scotland were better than I think than any I've ever seen before. We also saw a few uprooted trees on the way. They must get a lot of wind there because quite a few trees have been down, and it's great to see. And John was fascinated with this as well. It's great to see what trees look like from the bottom. All the root system and so on. We had a good opportunity to get up close to see them as well. At lunchtime, we stopped. Oh God, I can't remember the name now. I think it's Inverarnan, something like that. And we ordered Scotch broth and fish and chips at this pub, which was great. And it started raining a little bit more. So really, we were pushing on. It wasn't too far to go then. We only had a couple of miles after lunch. We were once again. I decided because it was wet, I was not going to wild camp. And in fact, this became more of a theme as the trip went on. John had been booked into a youth hostel, which was quite funny, being a 70-year-old guy or 69-year-old guy. And I found a place called Ben Lomond Lodge or bunkhouse. And even though it was a bunkhouse for 4 people, I had the whole room to myself. There were 3 women in the female bunkhouse, and I was in the room by myself. Because we had so much for lunch and we were still pretty tired, we decided to skip dinner. So John and I didn't see each other that evening. I was hanging out, chatting with the women from time to time. There was a boot room there. I did my washing. It's funny. You lose a lot of inhibition when you're hiking, and I had to strip down to my night clothes, which was basically long johns and a black sort of t-shirty sort of thing. I was just sitting there reading while I was doing all my washing, which was great to be able to get the washing done. And then not only was there the boot room had this washing machine, it also had a dry room, which allowed you to put all your wet stuff up there, and it all dried out really, really quickly. We didn't put it in the tumbler dryer at all. We just put it in this dry room. So really, that was the end of a short day 3. But I was feeling a whole lot better now. I know I'd felt bad the day before, and you know what? I'm still not sure I didn't get COVID. I may very well have got COVID, but because I was exposed to it obviously out there all the time. So just who knows? Maybe that's why I felt so bad the day before. But with day 3 in the books, I felt a whole lot better. And that's the end of day 3. Day 4, from Rowardennan, mile 27.6, to Inverarnan, mile 41.5, a 13.9 mile day. Day 4, Rowardennan to Inverarnan at the Drover's Lodge. This day we were going to be walking all day long along the banks of Loch Lomond, and I didn't realise that we could have taken the high road as opposed to the low road. I didn't even see a split any of that, or didn't even read about any of that at all. But we took the low road, which apparently is a lot tougher. But when we started, it was quite easy. It was quite relatively flat, wasn't any problems at all. And it wasn't raining at the start. John actually came to me, having stayed at the youth hostel. My place was on his way, as it were. And I think, because it's unusual for me to actually skip breakfast, but I think we did skip breakfast. So maybe we had some snacks or something like that with us. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what we did. So basically nuts and Snickers pretty much all day long, well, at least till lunchtime anyway. And we started out, we were in pretty good shape, feeling quite rested. Both of us had slept quite well. And we met a Scottish woman on the way selling water, which we were desperate for because neither of us had actually filled our water bottles. So we bought some water off this lady. But then we got right down by the water on this lower road, and it quickly got very, very tough. Those of you who've followed the show for some time will know that roots and rocks with rain is an awful combination. And we had those. And, frankly, I was kind of shocked how bad it was. It was as bad as several days I had in Maine, not in terms of elevation at all, but how wet some of the rocks were and how tricky it was. Well, needless to say, I was going over one of these rocks and I just slipped and fell really hard, actually. I hit my face on the ground and got a couple of cuts on my lip and on my cheek, I think it was as well. But more than anything else, when I fall over, especially bear in mind, having toured the UK for 3 weeks eating my way around the country with a full English or full Scottish or full Irish or full Welsh breakfast pretty much every day and a dinner every night and possibly a lunch sometimes as well. I was somewhat heavy. I was pretty near to 270 pounds. My pack was about 28 pounds, maybe 30 pounds. So I was carrying about 300 pounds altogether, effectively, me and my pack. And when 300 pound falls, it does not fall lightly. And I smacked my face into the ground. Fortunately, I didn't hit a rock, which was great. But, it always shakes me up. There's no question about it. Hiking can often be about confidence. And if you fall once or twice in a day, you're in trouble. You start getting more and more nervous about things. And there was thick mud and we were very slow. And we really took our time. It was quite a tricky morning, really. In fact, this was a tricky day, actually, to be honest with you. We eventually found ourselves at Inverarnan. And bear in mind, none of this was difficult in terms of elevation. This was all about roots and rocks and rain. And I found it quite tough anyway. Got to Inverarnan where we found a bar, of course. Guess what they had to eat? We were looking for something substantial like a sandwich. All they had was apple strudel. I just have no idea why. So I had a pint of beer, or we had a pint of beer each, and an apple strudel. But very nice of him. The guy behind the bar did fill our water bottles, so that was nice. So we set off, and we knew that this was going to be, as it turned out, a 13.9 mile day. And we were actually on trail for 9 hours because the second half was even tougher in many ways. And frankly, we got more and more exhausted. It was compounded, I guess, because we kept seeing the sun everywhere that we weren't. The rain was on us pretty much all day long. And we eventually got to this place, Inverarnan, and several people were camping. I think it was a place called Bineglass Farm. But where we were staying, where we'd booked, and as you can tell, I'm not wild camping anymore, we booked at the place called the Drovers, which was another half-mile walk. And I could have done without that. Another half-mile walk. I was definitely struggling again by then. The fall had really knocked it out of me, as I say. Anyway, we walked across a bridge to the Drovers, a pub, and frankly, it was quite expensive for a pretty crappy room, shared bathroom. I can't actually remember how much it was, but the food was good. Food was excellent, and we had steak pie. There's always plenty to eat on these things, and I did sleep. I slept really, really well. So, and that was partly because of my tiredness, and partly because I think I had the stuffing knocked out of me by that fall. But that was the end of day 4. Day 5 from Inverarnan, mile 41.5 to Tyndrum, or I think they call it Tyndrum, mile 53.3, an 11.8 mile day. Day 5, Inverarnan to Tyndrum. John had actually had a room booked separately away from the Drovers pub, just across the road somewhere. So we said we'd meet for breakfast, and John is notoriously late at getting up, and he was determined to beat me for breakfast. So I went to the room we'd been in for dinner the night before. John never turned up there. He was in another room, and they weren't getting served at all. Eventually, we got together in the same room and had breakfast, which was great. So when you start the day having to effectively walk back half a mile, it's not a great start. However, the great thing was there was no rain. And we started pretty darn good. There are plenty of rivers and waterfalls all around us. And we've noticed this all the way down the trail, actually. Obviously, Loch Lomond is a big body of water, but there's tons and tons of rivers leading down to it. And of course, having been swollen by the rain for the previous couple of days, then these rivers were quite lively, and we had to cross a few, although they weren't difficult at all. Not rivers, they were streams. And there are lots and lots of waterfalls going down, very, very pretty. Thoroughly enjoyed seeing those all the time. And also, Scotland's not very high. The highest mountain is Ben Nevis, about 4,000 feet. And we were going along through valleys and so on. And all around us there were mountains. And on top of the mountains there was snow. So it was beautiful, beautiful views all the way around. John was rather keen on the idea of stopping for a cup of coffee, or a cup of tea, rather. It wasn't a cup of tea. He knew I had a stove, and he knew that I could boil some water and we could have a cup of tea. So that's what we did. We walked up this hill, saw some people on a picnic table, which was perched on the top of this hill. Don't know how it got there. Don't know what that was all about. And it was our family. It was Gavin and Helen and Ruby and Charlie and the dog. I've forgotten what the dog's name was now, actually. But yeah, it was great to see them. And they were chatting with us, and they actually headed out, and we just sat down. And there's something... John's introduced me to something in hiking I'd never really looked at before, just reflecting on where you are, looking around and taking the time just to be quiet over a cup of tea in this particular case. So I boiled the water, made a cup of tea, and we were just sitting there in silence, in companionable silence, looking around at the beauty all around us. I don't do that enough, I'm afraid, when I hike. Frankly, some of the hikes I've done have been quite tough, and because they've been quite tough, I just want to get there. But in this case, because we were sauntering, the saunter turned into a more relaxed hike, and it did me a lot of good. I've got to tell you, it did me a lot of good. And then we left there, and we had a little climb up and then climb down, and it was amazing, actually. We were surrounded by what looked like a devastating scene where the forests had just all been chopped down, and the whole area around us was cleared. And I know, looking at the way in which they manage the forestry there, they're planting, there's tons of stuff being planted, but it looked devastating. And, it was kind of almost otherworldly to see all these logs chopped and piled up. I mean, it's great looking wood and that. So, but it's the circle of life, I guess. They keep replanting, and we saw lots of evidence of replanting in different places. But where we were on this particular hike down, it was pretty grim, let me tell you. And walking further down, we actually came to an 8th century burial ground, a sort of mound with actually more modern headstones on the top and so on. But this really fascinated John. It was called the Kirkton Burial Ground. And we hung around there looking at that, and it was kind of just a nice little... Not so much an antidote to the day, but another part of the day and part of the hike where you enjoyed seeing something else and looking at burial grounds. It's something you get more inclined to do when you're doing a hike than you would otherwise. And then the sun came out. Having had some pretty bad, cold, rainy weather for previous few days, it was lovely to see the sun out there. And we started taking jackets off and so on. And then it snowed. Hard to believe, I know. But, it was perfect and literally perfect. We were down to just shirt sleeves or a T-shirt or whatever it was I was wearing. I can't quite remember. And for the last mile or two walk into Tyndrum, that snow was pelting down. Having been a glorious sunny evening, we were out again relatively late, I'm afraid. And we got eventually into Tyndrum. Once again, John and I were staying at different places, me having booked late. And by the way, let me tell you, I don't know what it's like the rest of the year, because I'm sure the trail is very, very busy. But I was able to book on the morning I was staying there. I was able to book a place virtually every day on the morning I was staying there. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting into places, but perhaps later in the year it is a bit more difficult. And I stayed at a really nice place. And if I can remember what it's called, I would tell you. But I can't. But it is next to the Pine Trees Leisure Park. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Pine Trees Leisure Park, but next to it was where I stayed, and I loved it. We met up that evening at a pub, which was quite close to where John was staying, and we just had food and drink there, as you normally do. And I just want to say this, that 5 days into the trip, you spend time with somebody. And I did this with Trigger for 1,700 miles, and with Liderknot and T-Bird in 2014 on my other hike. And with Emma, my niece, on the Camino de Santiago. John and I never had a moment where we didn't have something to say to each other. Or if he wanted some silence, we'd be silent. And that was great as well. So none of that was ever a problem. We had a very comfortable relationship, and being in Tyndrum, it was, once again, it's a nice place to be. It was quite cold. It had got colder because of the snow, I guess. And there had been some sort of Arctic chill coming down, and it did hit us that day. But by and large, as long as you got the right gear, you can stay pretty warm. So that was the end of a fairly uneventful but really enjoyable day number 5. Day 6, from Tyndrum, mile 53.3, to the Bridge of Orkney, mile 60.3, a 7-mile day. So, day 6. I'd stopped short of where John was, and I knew the directions because the West Highland Way went straight to where he was staying, which was a place called Clifton Cottage, which he recommends really highly, by the way. He said that the owners were uber friendly. And in fact, he'd asked if I could come and join them for breakfast. So they said yes. And of course, I was going to pay for it, whatever they needed. It was lovely. There was birds outside. There was so much food. And of course, I did not stint myself. I had tons and tons. And I said to them at the end, how much do you want? Something like that. And they said, no, it's okay. It's fine. I said, I can't do that. My mother would never forgive me. my poor old mum's been dead for 40 years. And I still think that, she would not have forgiven me if I'd just gone there and gone out of there, having accepted their hospitality and not offered some money. And then I had to insist. They were having none of it to start with. No, they were delighted to meet you and all that sort of thing. Do you know what? People you meet in this community, and I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, I don't know whether they're intrigued or they're in love with the community, but I think they feel part of being on the West Highland Way in this particular case. They were facilitating the passage of people doing this long-held journey, I guess, and they wanted to help on the way. And it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And as we left Tyndrum, there was a bit of a climb. In fact, most of the way was climbing and then it was flat. It was only going to be about a 6.5 mile day, but it was the best weather we'd had so far. It was beautiful blue sky and so on. And I was doing a video, which I intended to put up on YouTube, but to be honest, quite a few of the videos had too much wind noise, so they're not going to work on YouTube at all. And John told me, because the day before, when we got surprised by this snow, he wanted to film me walking in the snow. And he said it was a great sight. The sun had been there. You could still see the sun there, but the snow was coming down all over me and me walking along. He said it was a great film. Well, it would have been a great film had he actually turned his camera on. All he got when he thought he was turning it off, he turned it on and got the inside of his pocket as he put it away. So that didn't work at all well. So that was John talking about his filming prowess. And by the way, before I forget it, one of the things that John and I did, once again, the stupid things you do, we made up limericks. One would say there was a young man from Manchester, and the other one had to do the next line, then the other one would do the next line, the other one do the next line, and the first person would have to finish it with the limerick. And do you know what? The silly things that entertain you. We were entertained constantly in the last 3 or 4 days doing that, because he was originally trying to give limericks to me, but no, we were doing making up limericks as we were going along, and some of them were pretty darn blue, but they were pretty good fun. There was yet another part of the trip, which I'll always remember. It's just a wonderful thing. As I say, we climbed up initially, and then it was fairly flattish into the Bridge of Orkney, and we were walking along some kind of beautiful path, and there was about a 60-foot drop to one side down to a glorious river, and then to our right was this big, big waterfall coming down right next to the road. And I'm thinking to myself, some of the beauty out here is much more than I ever imagined it was going to be. And I'm just grateful I had the chance to come out with John and see how beautiful it is. Once again, we met the family, Kevin, Helen, and the kids and the dog. Shelby, that's the name of the dog. I forgot it earlier on, didn't I? And we eventually, and it was lovely to see them. They'd made the changes they need to make, and they were much more comfortable with how it was going. And once again, that camaraderie they shared between each other as a family and the spirit they were showing about continuing on was just wonderful to see. And we were overjoyed to see them, to be honest with you. It was lovely seeing them on the trail and continuing to live their dream. We eventually got to the hotel, and it's quite an expensive hotel, but it was pretty darn nice. And we had lunch there and so on. And frankly, spent the rest of the day just hanging out. I slept a bit in the afternoon, read a bit, and it was enjoyable. And that really was the end of day 6. But one thing happened. I was looking through the West Highland Way Facebook page, and a lady called Julie Jeffrey had said that she and her husband had booked I think they're called the Glencoe camping pods at Glencoe Centre. I'm not really sure actually where that is. And that they were they couldn't make it, so they would be available for at the end of our day 7. And I booked nowhere. And John had booked a place called King's House, which I've got to tell you, at £260, which is over $300 for a room, and as I understand it, a relatively average room, seemed expensive. So I wasn't going to do that. I'd actually intended to wild camp for the first time that day, but I thought, well, if these pods are still available, I'll reach out to Julie. I reached out to her, and she said, sure. So I said, how much do I owe you? And she said, well, look, they're paid for, so you don't need to pay anything. But if you want to, you can donate to a climbing wall that she's obviously supporting. So I said, sure. So I donated to the climbing wall, and I got the opportunity on the next day to stay in these pods. So I appreciate that, Julie. And hopefully the climbing wall is going to be built. I know I didn't give enough to completely build it, but I gave some, and hopefully they reach their target. And I really thank you for making those available, because I really appreciated being there. But that's the end of day number 6. Day 7, from the Bridge of Orkney, mile 60.3, to Glencoe, mile 72.4, a 12.1 mile day. Day number 7, we had breakfast at 8:30. John never liked to hurry, I've got to tell you, before we headed out. And it was a glorious day with regular sun. It was absolutely beautiful out there. We were pretty exposed after a climb out of Bridge of Orkney. It was very windy. And we went through some woods and so on. And we were pretty open much of the day for the rest of the day. We remarked then about these changing views that we're seeing. I'd never really thought about it before. As you go higher, you see different things. You see a loch, and then you go a little bit higher, and the loch's disappeared, or a mountain's come into view. And it's that change in perspective, because of course the views don't change. Your perspective does the whole time. And I just became more aware of stuff like that. I think it's because John kept saying, let's stop and look around and think and be silent. And that really was a real feature of the hike for me, I've got to tell you, more than I actually thought it would be. So these things it looked like they were shifting and disappearing and appearing all day long. On this open area, there was a cairn, about 20 feet up, a little mound. We took the trip up there to throw a stone onto the cairn, and we took a lovely 360. I've been so, and I've said it, I know I've already said it in this podcast before, but I've been so impressed by how wild it all looks and how beautiful that wildness is. To have snow all around you and yet not touching you for most of the time has been just glorious for me. It's, apart from the 2 really wet days, it's been very, very hikeable and, very enjoyable to be out there. So we left the mound and went down again. And it was a slow climb for the rest of the day. We could see the King House Hotel in the distance. As I say, I wasn't prepared to pay 260 quid or 300 whatever it is dollars to get into this place. I don't care how good it is. I'll pay anything for anything, but it feels to me like a bit of a rip-off personally. They obviously have their reasons for doing it, but it seemed way too expensive to me. But because of the place everything being so open, we could see King's House for a long way away. It took several hours to get there. And I was actually stopping off early at Glencoe, and we found this little stop-off point, and John went on to King's House, and I went up to the pods, signed myself in, and they're neat little things. They're like little hobbit houses, I guess. And went in there, charged everything up in there. And they've got beds, but there's no bedding. So I used my sleeping bag, obviously. And it was a comfortable night. I slept well, so it wasn't any problem at all as far as that's concerned. And they had a restaurant, which was fine. I think I had a burger and something. I'm not quite sure what I had actually. And a couple of beers. Read for a while. There are lots of skiers up there. So I chatted with a couple of people in there and just retired to bed quite early and read for about 2-3 hours. I was listening to the Masters Golf on my radio, and so I followed most of that all the way through. Fell asleep in and out of that being on. But by midnight, I actually turned it all off and finally went to sleep. It was great to spend some time by myself. Actually, I kind of enjoyed that. And part of hiking for me is getting away by myself. I've loved being with people I've hiked with all the time, but having those little periods of time by yourself is kind of nice. I did it in 2014. Once I'd met up with Lyda Knott and T-Bird. He went away for a day or so, and Trigger went away for 2 or 3 days in 2019. So having that little bit of time by myself, I valued it. And I valued just being able to read and just do what I wanted to do. I didn't have to think of anybody else. So that was the end of day number 7. Day 8 from Glencoe, mile 72.4 to Kinlochleven, mile 81.3, an 8.9 mile day. So day number 8, I was by myself walking down to King's house, and we'd already worked out I could have breakfast at King's house, so of course I'm going to take the advantage of that. And I found myself walking down there and reflecting. As I said from the previous night, I'd been by myself, and it's always good to reflect on what's happened and so on. And I was reflecting a number of things, one of which was talked about those changing views that I'd never really noticed before, to be honest with you. Also, it was great to be with my mate. We'd been talking non-stop. I really enjoyed that. And frankly, this hike was harder than I'd imagined. And had I realised it was as tough as it was, I probably would have asked John to come along. I wasn't sure what I landed him in, but he appeared for a first-time hiker to really, really cope well with it and had no problem physically. In fact, physically, he was stronger than me, no question. He still plays tennis 6 days a week, so gives you a rough idea, doesn't it? I would recommend this to anybody who wants to get away, either to walk by themselves or with a friend, because you can do either. You can spend, like you can on the Appalachian Trail, as much time as you like by yourself, as much time as you like with other people. It's all your choice. And having that choice is a wonderful thing. Got down to King's house, had a great breakfast there, I must say. It was really good. It may be expensive to stay there, but the breakfast did not suck at all. So we had a beautiful start to the day again as well. Lovely, lovely sunny weather. And we started a little climb out of King's house. Everywhere we stop, there's normally a climb out of it as well. And we're finding some magnificent backdrops for pictures because once again, we were walking with mountains all around us. And we were heading for what's supposed to be the notorious Devil's Staircase. I've got to tell you, even to this day, I have no idea if the Devil's Staircase is the hike up to 2,000 feet or the hike down from 2,000 feet. Whatever it is, it wasn't that difficult. It was a pretty good climb. We did go up to 2,000 feet, and it was actually the first time we'd gone above 2,000 feet. But when we got to the top, I did a video said, look, we've either just come up it or we're just about to go down it. I had no idea. But I knew we were going down 2,000 feet into Kinlochleven. And frankly, that was towards the end, a pretty lousy and unexciting road walk at the end. And we once again, we could see Kinlochleven a long time before we got there. It seemed like we were going round and round and round and round and just never could get there. And it was tough on my knees. I did have a few problems with my knees. I'd booked another place yet again, not where John was, a place called Altnaleven, and it was beautiful. I guess Altnaleven is probably something to do with the River Leven, because we're at Kinlochleven, so I presume that's what it is. And I was staying south of the river, and I actually went off trail earlier than I needed to. And I was cursing myself the whole time because my place I was staying at was right by a bridge, which was where the West Highland Way was. So I could have carried on, gone along the West Highland Way, then got to that bridge and then come south over the bridge to where I was staying. So I knew the following day, because I'm really anal this way, I had to go back and retrace my steps, but that was for the next day. I loved it at this place, Altnaleven, run by this lovely couple, and my room was kind of girly, very pink, but very beautiful, very pretty room, and just a perfect temperature, and very, very comfortable place. I really, really enjoyed that. But we got there by 3:15 p.m. for a very good reason. You know me and my sports, but I wanted to watch Manchester City versus Liverpool soccer match on the TV. So I thought if we can get there by 3 to 3:30, we get to watch it. Which the game was going to be on at 4:30 in the afternoon. Well, we got there. Of course we did. Cleaned up, went to the local pub, and I watched the game with John. We decided not to eat there. Nothing wrong with the pub, but wasn't really our style, really. And we went to another place called the Ice Factory, which, to be frank, wasn't that great either. But it was edible. I think we had a burger. And we met up with the family again. They're everywhere. I don't know how they keep up with it. They got these, taking this great down. I still can't get over that. Now, Gavin was struggling with his feet, so I gave him some Luca tape and some Neosporin, and he tried it out apparently the next day. But there we were, Kinlochleven, 8 days in, and I was starting to get reflective now. At the end of every hike, you think back to what's happened, and I remember going to bed that night, just going back on my various thoughts and taking a few more notes so I could do this, obviously, eventually. And I thought 15 miles tomorrow is going to be tough, but you know what? We're going to get there. And the feeling of eventual accomplishment is always great. But that night before you do that, in my case, say up Katahdin when I was doing the Appalachian Trail, or the day I went into Santiago to finish the Camino de Santiago, it's a special day. You feel like you're almost on a lap of honour. It turned out the next day not to be a lap of honour, but it was a terrific day because I was just getting ready to finish up this hike tomorrow. Even though it was going to be 15 miles, I knew I was going to do it. So I felt pretty good going to bed on day number 8. Day 9 from Kinlochleven, mile 81.3 to Fort William, mile 96.8, a 15.5 mile day. Day number 9, our last day. I decided to test for COVID as I was going to be getting on a plane the following day. Thankfully, I was negative. God knows what I would have done if I was positive, but I was negative, so happy days as far as I'm concerned. I was still staying, obviously, at Loch-Lomond, and John was doing his own thing there. He didn't want to get out early again, so I had breakfast where I was staying, and I retraced that half mile or so that I'd missed, went back round on south of the river, crossed and rejoined the West Highland Way, went along the north of the river and came out just 100 yards from where I was staying the night before. It added 0.6 miles to the day, and as it was a 15-mile day already, it turned for me into about a 16-mile day, so, I met John at 9 a.m. That worked out fine. It's quite a climb out of Kinlochleven. Of course it is, though. There's a big dip into it. But then the day was probably the most memorable from the point of view of some of the scenery we saw. It was spent in glorious wild country. Eventually, after the climb, and it was quite extensive, up to about 400 or 500 feet, I guess, it was like we were walking along a ridge, but it was actually in a valley, walking through a valley between mountains all around. And while we were actually climbing up, John once again filmed the silence, literally in a video with the sound on, and you could hear literally nothing. And there's something so powerful about silence in the wilderness. And we loved it. We just really, really loved it. Then we got to the top and it became very, very windy for pretty much the rest of the day. And for the first, 10 miles, 9 miles, the wind was at our back, which was good because I would not like to have walked into that wind. We passed this derelict farmhouse where a couple of people were hunkered down behind a wall having a snack. And of course, that triggered John to want hot chocolate. So we scoped out a place to stop as much out of the wind as possible. And once again, just sitting down, firing up the gas stove, pouring water in and then making ourselves some chocolate. It was hot chocolate. It was pretty darn gorgeous. And we just thoroughly enjoyed it, the whole thing. The walk continued on, and it looks to me, it's about 8 or 9 miles. It looks fairly straight, and you can see in the distance where you're going. It takes a long time to get there, and we're crossing streams and these really old bridges, small old bridges as well. And the path would skirt some higher points. There'd be a little rise. We wouldn't go right over the rise. We'd just kind of skirt it, which then opened up the views to the east even further. And then we had glorious views Ben Nevis. And Ben Nevis is the tallest mountain in the UK, actually, just over 4,000 feet. I know it's not very high to most people. From where we were, it looked pretty magnificent, to be honest with you. And it was in our sights for about the next 5 or 6 miles. And by now, my chafing had become, I think it's reasonable to use the word distressing in this particular case. I was getting very, very uncomfortable. And with about 4 or 5 miles to go, I was struggling. I was going to get there, but I was struggling. So you know what? I wasn't going to let it take away from the day. I just gritted my teeth and got on with it. And eventually we had another, bit like the day before, horrendous downhill. And it was a road, maybe it was an old logging road or whatever it was, I'm not sure. But it was a road, and there were a bunch of people on that road, and we're just going down and down and down, just at that angle that's uncomfortable on your knees. A bit flatter would have been okay, but this just goes down and down and down. And eventually you get towards the flat, you go across a small path in a meadow, and then you're on the main road leading in to Fort William. And I was struggling even more by now, and I was getting exhausted and pretty much uncomfortable. And then we saw a monument to the original endpoint of the trail. And of course, we took the obligatory picture of the two of us, knowing we still had about another mile or so to go. And as you get into Fort William, there's this very, very pretty little park that takes you to the main street, I guess, of Fort William and leads you along High Street. It's kind of an odd way to finish, actually. And not that we expected a round of applause or people recognising we were hikers and we'd just done this, for us, pretty epic adventure. But it just felt so out of place to be walking through a high street to get to the end of a trail. I know what I feel. I think those of you who've done it will probably kind of know what I feel. And eventually we got there, and we sat next to that little bloke on the bench who marks the end of the West Highland Way. And our first thought was to go and have a drink. So we went and have a drink in a pub, watching other people finish. But we never saw the family, Gavin and Helen, and we were just kind of concerned. We didn't know what had happened to them. Anyway, we were staying in a guest house that night, and so we got back there. Very nice house, by the way. And we went to dinner in the town. And as we were ordering our food, actually I think we may even been eating our food, who should walk past but Gavin and Helen, Charlie, Ruby, keep forgetting that dog, Shelby the Great Dane. They'd actually finished before us. So John and I just got out of our seats and we did what we wanted for us. We got and gave them a round of applause there walking down the road. But they'd finished before us, and they were so excited. They were pleased to see us, and thankfully the Luca tape in the nearest sporran had helped Gavin's feet, and that was it. So that was the end of a 9-day hike on the West Highland Way. So that was it. We were done. I've had to recreate some of my notes to record this. The recordings I made out on trail were just overwhelmed by the rushing wind and my rustling jacket. Yep, rookie mistake, I know. I hope you all got something out of that, but if you didn't, normal service will be resumed next week and we'll be back to our usual lineup. Please let me know what you think of these occasionally different shows. They're more difficult to put together, but I like the idea of shaking it up a bit. I'd love to hear from you on this and any other ideas you may have for the podcast. You can always reach me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. I'll see you next week.